Hi and welcome. The diamond necklace was supposed to be hers. 6 months pregnant. By Sloane stood in the silence of her marble kitchen, her hand on the curve of her belly, staring at the velvet box her husband had just snapped shut. His words still rang in her ears. Cold, clipped and final. You're not event ready. The necklace, the gala, even the role of wife. He had given them all to another woman. But what Elias Falter never imagined was that the wife he discarded would return. That very night, holding the hand of the billionaire. Who could destroy him? The box looked small from a distance. A black square on a glacier of Kerala marble. Up close, it became a bruised, dark, tender. Impossible to ignore. Brian stared at it as if staring might change what had already been spoken. As if the diamond necklace inside could return to being a promise rather than a weapon. It's simple, Elias said, straightening a coglin with the practiced indifference of men who never have to clean up their own spills. You're not event ready. The optics matter. It's one night. The words were clipped. The tone surgical. The man who used to lie her name like a melody now used it as a scalpel. He didn't meet her eyes. He admired himself in the chrome curve of the espresso machine. Watched his face sharpen and glow. Optics, she asked. Her voice felt like it belonged to someone else. Thinner, airless. What are we, Elias? A product shot. We, he said, adjusting his bow tie, are about to close. The biggest relationship this firm has seen. Roger Davies will be there. So will 3 senators. The paparazzi donors. I need to project. Unencumbered energy. Unencumbered. She repeated softly, letting the words sit in the room like poison. Is that what our son is? A muscle in his jaw jumped. He finally looked at her, not with love. Not even with annoyance. Worse, with that gentle parental patience you reserve for someone you plan to ignore. Don't be dramatic. You're tired. Your ankles are swollen. You said so yourself this morning. Take the night to rest. And the necklace? He shrugged as if distributing property were a housekeeping note. It shouldn't sit in a box. It needs to be seen. Katrina's going in my place. She finished. She'd seen the late-night texts, the urgent scope questions, the photos in restaurant mirrors where he was just out of frame. She'd seen the way. Katrina's smile never quite reached her eyes. Furthermore, she'd seen all of it and pushed it into a neat file labeled. Later it burned in the open air. He lifted the box, then put it back down. Perhaps out of a remnant of politeness. We're on the cusp, BRI. Don't make this harder. He left behind the smell of cologne and a silence that roared. She held the edge of the island with both hands and breathed until the room stopped tilting. Somewhere beneath the panic, a steadier pulse knocked a kick, soft but insistent. Under her ribs, she placed her palm against the swell and found herself whispering, "It's okay." "I know." She walked to the bathroom and sat on the warmed floor back against cool marble. The tiles were a chessboard order laid underfoot. And she realized with a blink how much of her life had become that keeping squares aligned. So the pieces moved the way he wanted. Tears came then. Hot and humiliating, not just for the ball or the necklace, but for the quiet years of deferring her own blueprints to sketch out his. She had not always been the woman who edited speeches and selected cuff links. Once, in a sunlit office with mismatched chairs, she'd been the woman with maps pinned to walls, elevations, old right-of-way diagrams, community survey data, planning. A park on a warehouse roof in the Bronx urban canvas. They'd called it skeletal funding. Fierce ideas. That was where she had met eyes that made her feel seen rather than looked at. Donovan. Night had appeared after a board session. She'd thought had gone nowhere. Your vision is 20 years. Early, he had said, dry and oddly warm. The board will fund a safer wing. But the city will come round when it does call. He had slid a black card with a name and a number across the table. No assistance. No gatekeepers. A line drawn not through a committee but directly to him. The card lived in a keepsake box, old ticket stubs. A napkin with a sketch of an impossible bridge. Her grandmother's recipe for plum cake. She fetched it now with shaking hands. The bold white type glowed against matte black. She put the card on the counter and stared at it. The idea of calling felt absurd. Childish, needy. He was sponsoring the gala. He would be there somewhere above the crowd he hated. Furthermore, he wouldn't remember. And if he did, this was not his problem to solve. This wasn't about being rescued. It couldn't be another knock from inside. A rhythmic reminder. She swallowed the lump in her throat like a bitter pill. The call wouldn't be about the hurt. It would be about architecture, the kind that holds up after shaking. She dialed. It rang twice. Knight. His voice was low. Direct, no flourish. She nearly hung up. Mr. Knight Donovan. It's single quotes S. My name is Brian Sloan. Years ago I pitched Urban Canvas. You gave me your card. Her words scattered. She caught them and stacked them with effort. You said, call, when the world caught up. It hasn't, but something else has a pause. She saw the city at their windows in miniature, towers like lit metronomes ticking out other people's certainty. Miss Sloan. He said you wanted to build a park at top. A derelict warehouse. You made a case. The board couldn't hear. Told them they were fools. There was a exhale. I remember the relief left her dizzy. I wasn't going to call. She admitted. But tonight my husband. The sentence snagged. Fine. Get to the point. There's a gayer. You're sponsoring. The room will be full of exactly the people who can either open doors or weld them shut. I cannot be erased tonight. I need to be there as myself. Not as anyone. Single quotes S. +1. I intend to relaunch my work. I need a partner. Silence. Hummed. She pictured him scowling at a laptop, checking time zones, calculating optics of his own. Despise bullies. He said the words flat, heavy as a gavel, and I detest men who confuse optics with substance. Be ready in 90 minutes. A car will be at the service. Entrance. You aren't coming as a date. You're coming as my partner. A beatwear. Something that makes you feel powerful. He ended the call. The word powerful echoed like a bell. She stood on ankles. He had called swollen and walked into the closet. On Elias's side, navy, charcoal, midnight labels and safe fonts. On hers, soft knits, silk shells, maternity dresses chosen for comfort rather than stagecraft. And then, at the far back, in a garment bag, a siren she'd never dared answer, deep emerald silk. A cut that emphasized rather than excused. A neckline that said the word woman without apology. Empire waist. Flowing skirt. A chance. She stepped into it. The fabric whispered up her skin. It fit not perfectly. But truthfully, she took her jewelry box down and passed the small, tasteful things she'd learned to select for rooms where she was expected to be supportive but not bright. Beneath them lay her grandmother's legacy, platinum and onyx, angles and courage. The necklace settled at her collarbones with a cool certainty. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. A team is at your service entrance. They're from me. Let them in. DK. The bell rang. The woman who introduced herself as Lena assessed the dress, the necklace, the face. We won't hide the pregnancy, she said. Calm, competent. We honor it. The man, George, moved like a shadow, checking lines of sight, confirming routes with someone she couldn't see. He spoke once into his sleeve. Asset is secure. Extraction in 10. No press. She almost laughed. A few hours ago, she had been a situation. Now she was an asset. She let Lena angle her chin, lift her hair, brush warmth onto skin that had gone ash pale when the last pin slid into place. The woman in the mirror looked like someone who could draw a skyline without shaking. Her phone dinged again. A photo. Elias and Katrina in a mirror. Diamonds bright at the throat. They didn't belong to caption. Wish you were here having a great time. The pity in her smile surprised her. She deleted the message and followed George to the service elevator. The car that waited under the city was dark and discreet. A chassis that implied rather than declared. As it slid into traffic, she rested a hand on the life that had made her brave and allowed herself, for the first time that day, to breathe. All the way to the bottom of her lungs. Tonight would not be about getting even. It would be about getting free. The car didn't turn toward the Grand Plaza. It cut downtown through bands of yellow cabs and late commuters, braking in front of a brownstone with a door like a secret ivy, climbing its frame, brass. Polished to a glow. Mr. Knight prefers a side entrance, George said. Avoids the scrum. The door opened. As they reached for it, Donovan Knight stood, framed by warm light, long lines. No wasted movement. He looked like the city if the city had a human face. Not pretty, but inevitable. Miss Sloane, he said. His eyes took her in dress necklace, the set of her shoulders. A small nod that landed like a contract. You look like a woman who knows the span and load-bearing limits of her own design. I intend to, she said, and found her voice had steel in it. He led her not to a salon but to a room humming with quiet machinery. One wall was all screen. A mosaic of the gala, the red carpet, the roped-off press. The faces of people who mistook being seen for being significant. Reconnaissance. He gestured. Know the terrain. There's Davies. He respects money and power. In exactly that order. Next to him, Senator Michael Elson, Urban Development Committee. Useful and cautious. And he paused, lips quirking. Your husband pining. Let him warm the cameras before we walk in. He said husband, as if naming a variable, not a person. A factor to anticipate and neutralize. I meant what I said on the phone. Donovan continued. He picked up a slim, black portfolio and offered it to her. You're not my date. You're my partner. The Knight Foundation will seed your initiative with $5 million. Feasibility on 3 sites you once proposed. Plus capacity to hire a team. It moves tonight. If you say yes. Her name was printed on the first page. Sloane Initiative. Crisp. Elegant, not embellishment, but signature. Her fingers trembled. Why? She asked, surprised even her. Why me? Why now? Because you despise my husband. I don't know your husband, he said, a corner of his mouth tilting. I know types. I also know the first few minutes of your urban canvas. Talk by heart. You didn't sell a park. You argued for lungs. You made an old man think like a 19-year-old. Idealist for 5 minutes. That's rare. I hoard it. The timing you called when my name on your shoulder will not simply help. It will clarify. Clarify what that substance was in the room all along, and nobody looked. You don't need rescuing, Miss Sloane. You need amplification. Amplification. She rolled the word in her mouth like a sip of something stronger than water. In the mirror above a side table, Lena's work caught the light. The pregnancy, which had felt like a liability an hour ago, looked like a coronation now. The line of her lifted neck, the onyx points. The emerald fall. You'll be photographed. Donovan said. You're good with that. I don't want a circus. You made a choice 90 minutes ago. That precludes invisibility. He looked back at the screens. We don't borrow the circus. We own the tent. He glanced down at his watch. Cocktail hour rises. Attention WAINs. We enter at the trough. We greet Michael Elson. First 2 sentences about stormwater, remediation and youth employment. He's yours. We do not look at Davies until he looks at us. He will. And he will adjust when, if your husband intercepts. You'll introduce me as your business partner and use your maiden name. It is both accurate and the most efficient. Cut. The thought hit like cold water. The name had always still been hers. In private places, on notebooks, inside jackets. Hearing him speak. The tactic out loud turned sentiment into instrument. Is that cruel? She asked before she could stop herself. It's structural, he replied. Names are beams. Put them where they hold weight. George appeared in the doorway. Vehicle is staged. Entrance in 12. Donovan offered his arm without flourish. One last thing, he said. You will be tempted to feel grateful tonight. Don't feel ready. They rode in silence. Broken only by the city lights smearing across windows like watercolor dot, the Grand Plaza reared up. Gilded and arrogant, the kind of building that insisted on itself as they waited. In a shadowed corridor off the main doors, Lena's final text arrived. You look magnificent. Remember who you are? I slid the phone into her clutch and curled her fingers around Donovan's for one grounding breath. He did not squeeze back. He held steady like a handrail built to code. Ready? He asked. She nodded. Let's own the tent. The doors opened. Not with a creak, but with a letting in sound. Poured strings, chatter, the weird little gasps people make when they smell money. A ripple ran through the crowd. Something biological, a school of fish parting for a shark. They did not stride. They did not strut. They moved as if the room had been built to receive them. As if every chandelier had been hung to light their path. Cameras flashed a strobe. Weatherfront eyes swung a murmur. Who is she? Carried like mist? Donovan did not break pace. He aimed them at the cluster near the stage, where Michael Elson was already turning hand. Extended antenna up. Senator Donovan said. You should meet my partner. Miss Brian Sloan, founder of the Sloan Initiative. We're aligning Greenway design with workforce training in districts you've earmarked for flood mitigation. Michael Elson's eyebrows went up. We are. That would be a blessed relief. He focused on her. Not the man beside her. A sign she clocked and stored. Miss Sloan. I've read about urban canvas. Your cost per acre figures were aggressive. They were what it would cost if we stopped pretending. Public space doesn't pay dividends. She said, finding a grin. And if we leveraged rooftops you already own? He said warm. Walk me through your numbers next week Monday. Donovan said, smiling, as if simply scheduling the sunrise. They moved on in a glide. Not their own. People unwed themselves from conversations to be in their orbit. The way people do when they sense the field is shifting, and don't want to be caught on the wrong side of the fault. By the time they neared Davies, the man's granite expression had melted around the edges. His eyes were on her. Not Elias, which would have been funny if it weren't so precise. And there, just beyond, was Elias, with Katrina glittering painfully beside him, her hand on his arm. The way a person steadies themselves at the edge of a cliff. His smile, so good on billboards. So practiced at closings. Wobbled, Brian. He began. She turned first to Donovan, because that's how control looks. Mr. Falter. Donovan said, ice and velvet. I believe you're acquainted with Miss Sloan. The maiden name landed like a measured blow. She watched Elias flinch. Katrina's eyes slid to the necklace at Bai's throat, and then, to her credit, back to her face. That dress, Katrina said, brittle. Brave. Brian almost said thank you and decided against generosity. That would be mistaken for permission. It's functional. She said. Instead. I find armor helps. Donovan moved them on before Elias could reply, and she didn't look back. Breathe. Donovan said, quiet, as they approached the stage where a news anchor in a silver sheath was thanking the committee between sips of sparkling water. Next beats the auction. What happens there? Money postures. We redirect. How does one redirect money? By giving it a better story. The anchor's voice rose. Waiters began to sweep the periphery clean of empties. A tide pulling back. The first lot went fast. Art, the second. Vacation giggled its way to a hedge fund wife. The third. Naming rights for a pediatric wing thickened the air. The room leaned forward, scenting validation. Ace's arm came up. Paddle smooth. 1 million, he called. And the sound of it was a man trying to reboot a narrative. 1,000,002. Someone else said 15. Elias announced louder. Cameras found him again. Thank God. His relief broadcast in pause. The auctioneer milked the moment. 1.5 on my left. Going once, going twice 5, Donovan said. Without raising a hand, silence dropped. It didn't matter that he hadn't said 1,000,000. It hung there anyway. The auctioneer stammered 5,000,000 from Mr. Knight. Donovan held up his hand, a conductor. Summoning a change. Correction. The Knight Foundation funds. The pediatric wing as a matter of course. My 5 tonight is for something else. He turned to the room. Then to her, and the pivot itself wrote a headline. Ladies and gentlemen, he said. Casual as a dinner toast, and somehow more electric than the chandeliers. Tonight launches the Sloan Initiative led by Miss Bryan. Sloan Green Infrastructure. Built where it's needed most, designed to employ and endure. Consider this our first brick. He didn't say her husband's name. He didn't have to for a second. Nothing moved. Then the applause arrived. Not the brittle clack of obligation, but the kind that starts at sternums and comes out of palms. She felt her heart punching at her ribs and told it. Yes. Fine, okay, be loud. She did not look over her shoulder, where she knew a man was trying to swallow a room. Furthermore, she looked forward. The thing about power is that it has a sound. It is not the clamor we associate with it. It is the way a busy place thins to leave a channel. As the applause ebbed, the ballroom rearranged itself like iron filings turned by a magnet. People who spent their careers pretending not to know where advantage lay now remembered. They found her. It's an honor, said a woman with a museum title longer than her wrist. We've got a 4B block corridor with no shade. Could your team prototype canopy greens? We can. By said and heard the as new. Not her, not an apology. Set of tools in motion. A developer she once begged for a meeting now angled his body towards her as if he could absorb her momentum through osmosis. We've got rooftops we can't lease, he said. Could be a pilot. Send elevations. She replied and took his card, not like a favor but like a bid. Roger Davies materialized with a smile that did not empty his eyes. Mid Sloan, he said like a man introducing himself to gravity. I've heard about your work. You saw it, she corrected quietly. You just didn't know you were looking. Donovan coughed what might have been laugh. Davis's gaze flitted once toward figure on the edge of the crowd, then returned recalibrating. Mr. Knight's support speaks loudly. Not louder than the project's will, she said. You'll want a visit when we break ground. Bring boots. His mouth twitched. I will. There were handshakes, cards. The choreography of influence, a dance she'd watched while holding coats. Now dancing without asking permission, she moved through it with instinct. Not to punish anyone, not to win small wars, but because the map had always been in her head and someone had finally given her the pen. Is your husband always this quiet? Donovan murmured once they had a sliver of space by a column. He talks a lot when he's winning, she said. He doesn't recognize what losing sounds like across the room. Katrina was pale in a way makeup cannot fix. She had lost the diamond smile, and with it the thread that connected her to relevance. Brian felt a brief, acute sadness for a young woman who had bet on optics and forgotten content. Then she let the feeling go. The anchor returned to the mic offering closing thanks. Rinsing the event in gratitude, waiters reappeared like synchronized swimmers. The band struck a standard, and the floor blurred into pairs. Donovan didn't ask to dance. Kept her near the edge where conversations happened and deals got sketched on linen napkins. 2 more passes, he said. Then we ghost, leave without saying goodbye, keeps the narrative clean. Never stay long enough for the third photo. That's how you turn into wallpaper. Do you have a manual for this? She asked. I write it as I go. He checked his watch and something softened in his face. Just a fraction. How are you? Strangely calm. She said, hungry. We should have fed you, he said. Annoyed with himself, he flagged a waiter and commandeered canines like a pirate of compassion. Eat. You're building Rome tonight. She took a bite, and the room sharpened. At the edge of her lifeline, Elias finally moved toward them, roped by equal parts pride and panic. Brie, he said, stopping close enough to smell the champagne on his breath. Not close enough to be in her light. Can we talk? We're working, she said, and the we hung between them like a no trespassing sign. Working, he repeated, sneering tread lightly across his tone. What is this? A stunt, you called him. After I asked you. You replaced me with your associate and called it strategy, she said, keeping her voice low. Even I called a partner and called it what it is. Told you the optics. Optics didn't fund anything tonight, she said. Substance did. He looked at Donovan as if making eye contact. Might reorient the universe. You don't know her. You think this is. I know talent, Donovan said. Conversational as weather. I don't acquire people. I invest in work. Good evening, Mr. Falter. He turned away. And she went with him, and Elias for once had no line to throw that would bring her back. They exited clean with only a rustle of curiosity in their wake, not lingering long enough to let anyone talk them into a selfie or out of a principal in the car. Donovan let his head fall back against the leather and exhaled. For what might have been the first time that night. Phase 2 starts now, he said. What's Phase 2? Monday. We carve time on the senator's calendar. We get you the least loft to work in. By Wednesday. We hire an ops lead and a design lead. By Friday. We annoy a few people. Who need annoying. We pay for coffee. She laughed, and it sounded like a window opening. My grandmother used to say, she told him, eyes on the blur of city as they crossed back downtown, that every demolition is a love letter to the building that should have stood there instead. He nodded. Then, let's write in ink. At the brownstone, George returned her phone. Press is already warming up, he said. We can put a short statement on the wire, nothing thirsty. She typed. Tonight we announced the Sloan Initiative with seed funding from the Knight Foundation. Our mission is simple. Build green infrastructure that works for the people who live beside it. This city deserves lungs, not fig leaves. Good, Donovan said, reading over her shoulder. You write like an engineer. Is that a compliment? The highest on the stoop, the night air, had the particular city. Cool that slides under even the best coat. Donovan glanced at her arm. You're shaking adrenaline, she said, and the realization that I never ate dinner. He frowned at himself again. Well, fix that in Phase 3, but for now rest. Tomorrow we start playing the long game. The car took her home. Not to the penthouse, but to a hotel with sheets that didn't know her name. A deliberate choice. George checked the hall before she swiped. Lena had left. A small bag on the bed. Flats, a soft t-shirt, a bottle of something that smelled like chamomile, and competence. By washed her face and watched the woman in the mirror take off her armor. The onyx necklace lay cool and content on the dresser. She touched her belly. We did it, she whispered. A kick answered. She fell asleep mid-smile. In another part of the city, a man scrolled through headlines with a scowl that deepened into a tremor. But that was a different story, and, for the first time in years, not her job to manage. High society loves a neat narrative, especially when it comes packaged with diamonds and humiliation. The story of the night spread like a chemical bloom. A spurned wife arrives hand in hand with the reclusive donor. The husband bids. The donor doubles, then reframes. The wife becomes not a pity object but a principal. It was too archetypal to resist. By morning, a column called The Verdict posted a recap that read, Like a ballet dancer wielding a scalpel, the headline did what headlines do: elevated, simplified, skewered, but even in the barbs there was an accidental fairness. The column grasped that the room had not simply clapped for money. It had clapped for direction. At 11. Elias's phone rang with the tone he used for people who mattered. "Mr. Davies," he said, putting a smile on his voice and his shoes on his feet at the same time. "Now," the assistant said, and hung up the elevator ride to the top floor. Stretched. He passed desks where heads turned and ducked the wave that overtakes an office when the weather changes. It smelled like coffee and fear. Roger Davies didn't make him sit. He stood with his back to the window and waited until Elias closed the door. "I built this firm on two principles," Davis said, voice low, clipped the way you talk when you want the words to bruise. "Strength, foresight. Last night you showed neither." Elias opened his mouth to argue optics and strategy, and the unfairness of billionaires, but Davies picked up a paper from his desk, ink on pink stock, and tapped it with a finger. "What matters isn't that Knight outbid you. He can outbid anyone. What matters is that you walked into a room, carrying a live wire, and electrified nothing. You didn't read the room. You didn't read your life." That story, Elias began. But Davies continued as if the interjection were a fly. "You had a partner. A mind we would have paid to keep adjacent. You chose a prop instead. And then you paraded the choice through a camera gauntlet. Furthermore, you handed a man who turns checks into leverage a queen, and you smiled while you did it." Elias wanted to protest. He wanted to say, "But she was tired, and my plan was, and you said impressions." "Roger, you said impressions." He wanted to say, "Katrina looks good on a step," and repeat, "Furthermore." He wanted to pick up the necklace in his pocket like a talisman and find it warm. Nothing came. That didn't sound like a child pleading not to be sent to his room. "You will clear your desk by noon," Davies said. "You will receive what the contract requires and no more. And you will not, do you understand me? Not use your building access to talk to junior staff. We're not letting your rot spread." The word rot landed. Elias felt the floor shift. "Roger," he said, trying for wounded dignity and landing in a puddle door. Davies said the corridor looked longer on the way back. The elevator took a century to arrive. He could feel eyes he didn't meet, examining the back of his jacket and assigning it to a future in New Jersey, on the street. Wind made knives of the air. He started walking because the alternative was standing still. The city, which had always felt to him like an asset he deserved, now felt like a market that had corrected. Inside a cafe, he watched on his phone as a clip of the auction aired on morning TV. The hosts used words like stunning and twist and didn't bother concealing the glee that came from the spectacle of a high-status man being dressed down without raised voice. He looked up at the chalkboard and realized his hand was shaking. He texted Katrina, "We can salvage this coffee." The typing dots appeared, then disappeared a minute later. "Lose my number?" He imagined with detached curiosity what her world felt like. Emails she would return, calls she would avoid, the calculus she would do about whether to stay at a firm that had just watched her attached to a cautionary tale. He thought of going home and realized he no longer knew where that was. Somewhere uptown in a rental car. A courier delivered an envelope to the front desk of a hotel where the room was registered under a name that was and wasn't his. Inside the envelope, papers. No theatrics, no insults, only clean lines. Grounds, infidelity. Irreconcilable differences. Terms, personal effects, retained inheritance. Untouched child support to a neutral trust name, to be reclaimed. He read the language 3 times and told himself to be angry. What he felt instead was a chasm, opening where habit had lived. In the lobby mirror, A man adjusted a tie that no longer implied a job. He looked tired. He looked like a person who had mistaken visibility for value. Furthermore, he did not text her. Furthermore, he did not know how anymore. The loft Donovan, leased by Monday morning, lived in a building that had spent a decade pretending not to be beautiful. Exposed brick met white plaster. Light pulled on a battered wood floor. Windows opened on a street that had opinions about food trucks. It felt like a place where work could be argued into being. "This is your canvas," Donovan said. And the words were not metaphor. They were a key. They put a folding table in the middle of the raw space and called it a desk. They brought in 2 chairs that didn't match. Furthermore, they wrote names on a whiteboard with dry erase markers that were already drying out. She hired the woman who returned her email with bullet points and receipts, operations, and the man who replied with a PDF of sketch overlays. Design. They ate lunch standing up the first week. They made lists on Wednesday. Senator Michael Lelson came by with an aide who took notes like a court reporter. On Thursday, a city planner she admired arrived with a stack of maps that smelled like toner and Old Hope. On Friday, Donovan brought coffee and a spreadsheet. "This is the first branch," he said. "It's a bridge, not a blank check. You'll raise the rest. You'll hate it. Furthermore, you'll get good at it." "I already hate it," she said, smiling, and he grinned back. Because he liked competence more than he liked ease. They walked sites with politicians in hard hats and local grandmothers in church hats. They took community meetings where the first 20 minutes were neighbors telling the city what the city had done to them last time they listened. They brought renderings printed on foam board that reflected not a fantasy but a block. At one meeting, a teenage girl, sitting in the back with her backpack in her lap, raised her hand and asked, "Do we get to plant anything?" "Yes," Bai said. "And well, pay you for it." The girl nodded in a way that said, "I will believe you when you do it." Press requests kept coming. Some she took, most she declined. She learned quickly the difference between telling a story to move a project and telling a story to feed a beast. She drafted op-eds that explained carbon sinks in plain language. Furthermore, she said the word lungs on TV once and then stopped saying it so it wouldn't turn into a brand. She didn't control. At night, she walked until her ankles did protest and then kept walking anyway, measuring blocks. With the same brain that once measured lines on a sonogram. She knew exactly how long it took to get from the proposed Greenway entrance to the subway. She knew where afternoon shade fell, where winter wind knifed through. Donovan was present without hovering. He had opinions about timing and optics, but rarely about design. When he did drift into details, she reminded him gently that beams were her department. He backed up with a hand raised in surrender and a pleased expression he tried to hide. Once in the quiet of the loft, after the others had left, she asked him, "Why didn't you build this yourself years ago?" "You could have. I could have paid for a version," he said. "Money can simulate a lot. It can't simulate the person for whom the work is non-negotiable." She thought about that for a long time. Then she said, "My grandmother would have liked you. I would have liked your grandmother." He said, "The line between gratitude and partnership stayed defined by behavior." Introduced her as founder, never the woman I'm backing, never the talent. He let her make mistakes and helped her correct them without the "I told you so" that adults too often tuck into their support. When the first check cleared from a donor, she'd CED herself. He emailed one word, "Builder." The divorce proceeded with the same understated efficiency as the envelope. There were no scenes in parking lots, no performative weeping. There was a brief civil meeting in a room with a carpet designed to look expensive. There was a pen that wrote with a flourish she hated. There was a judge who looked tired and kind. When it was done, she went to her grandmother's grave with a small bouquet of something wild, sat on the grass and told the stone 3 stories about the night, about the loft, about the girl who asked to plant. She only cried during the 3rd. The baby grew heavy, and then lighter, and then heavy again as he rolled and tested muscle and timing. She started talking to him while standing by the window each morning, telling him what could be seen from each angle, what had been there before, what might be there when he was 5. When he was 15. She told him that some people would smile and tell him not to be so eager, and that he should return the smile and ignore the command. On a Tuesday in late winter, wind hard enough to break umbrellas pushed her sideways on a Bronx sidewalk. Her team gathered in an unheated space under a trestle bridge and squinted at a map clipped to an easel. "This stretch," her design lead said, tapping the page where a dashed line cut through old rail. "Elevation is good. We can carve a ramp that meets Ada without feeling like an apology." She nodded, feeling the click that engineers live for when constraints line up and something honest emerges. "We'll anchor with a community garden here," she said, "chairs on rails, so grandmothers can rearrange shade without asking a city employee. Keep plantings low near entrances for lifelines. Tall in the middle for summer jobs." The ops lead asked. "Seed them 50 training slots. Pay above minimum. Guaranteed interviews for maintenance roles. Hire from these 3 blocks. First." Donovan listened, hands in pockets, every sentence filed. He didn't speak until a man who had been watching from a little distance, hood up, hands in hoodie, stepped closer. "You're really going to hire from here?" the man asked, skeptical as a reflex. "Yes," she said. "You're going to be here next year, or this one of them politician things. We'll still be here. And if I'm not, call me," she said, handing him a card with a number that rang a phone. She answered. He took the card and looked at it the way someone looks at tickets that might be real. "Okay," he said, leaving as quietly as he had come. "Every block," Donovan murmured as they packed up. "You earn it." "Good," she said. "I don't want anything we can't earn." That night at the loft they wrote a grant proposal together, like a duet. Her building the skeleton. Donovan arguing the paragraph that would be quoted 3 years later. "You hate commas," he said. "I hate commas." That apologize for thinking. He laughed. "God help your copy editors." She stretched her back, her body moving in ways that surprised her. "God help anyone who thinks I'm a mascot," she said. "None left in this room," he replied. Spring didn't so much arrive as lose patience with winter. Snow degraded into bitter gray and then into rivulets that paved the streets. Dark on a Monday morning that smelled like shoring. Earth. The lease on the Greenway's first section was approved. The signatures felt like the end of one story and the start of one. With cranes. They took photographs because you mark starts. In one. "Brian is laughing at something," a neighbor shouted. In another. "She is serious," looking past the camera to a place only she can see. Eyebrows drawn with concentration. "She looks like her grandmother." In both press came. She did not avoid it. She used it. The way you use scaffolding to hold weight, temporarily to reach something you couldn't otherwise. The story, she insisted, was not the divorce, not even the gala. The story was a ribbon of green that would intercept heat and conversation and small lives. If someone asked about the night, she redirected without scolding. It worked because she meant it. Elias, in a suit that felt itchy, commuted to a job that asked him to explain to people, with less money than he used to manage, why their remodel wouldn't start on time. He came home to a building that smelled faintly of bleach and boiled broccoli. He grew quiet enough to hear a clock. Furthermore, he dated a woman who liked documentaries and then stopped hearing from her when Google turned his name into a lesson. Furthermore, He stopped wearing cologne because even he couldn't stand it. Once, on a train platform, he saw a line about the Sloan Initiative scroll on the news ticker and looked away instinctively, as if sunlight had suddenly found him without his permission. He thought about texting Dot. He thought about the black card he'd once found in a drawer but never used. Furthermore, he thought about the way she had looked past him at the gala. Not with contempt, with accuracy. Furthermore, he did not send any messages when the greenway broke ground. The first shovel didn't turn dirt. It lifted the corner of an old warped board and revealed space a child could crawl through. The metaphor wrote itself, but they pretended not to see it. Because heavy-handedness ruins. Truth ends. People came with gloves. People came with strollers. Someone played brass badly and then better. News anchor filmed a segment on Heat Islands and mispronounced sedum. And an auntie corrected her. And the anchor laughed and corrected herself, and the auntie was famous in the neighborhood. For 2 days. I stood on newly swept concrete and felt panic unfurl, and then fold back obediently. She was getting good at telling it. Where to sleep, she delegated. She walked, she sat when she had to. Furthermore, she learned to say no to meetings that would be flattering but not useful. Furthermore, she learned to say yes to teenagers who wanted to paint a mural, and to tell them no when their first draft looked like a beer. Donovan arrived with coffee and left with 5 numbers written on a napkin. Stood a little apart, sometimes. Eyes scanning like a century who trusts the builders but doesn't trust the world. He did not touch her. He did not hover. Once, as a forklift beeped its slow way across a lot, he said, "This is what money should sound like." And she understood him without asking for a footnote. Double quotes. The last weeks of pregnancy felt like the first weeks of a project. All planning, no visible progress. Everyone asking for updates you could not give. She stopped caring whether strangers thought she looked tired when she rubbed her belly in a meeting. Men stopped talking, which she found both infuriating and briefly useful. She developed the habit of drinking cold water before calling anyone who worried her, so her voice would be low and certain. Her son came on a rainy morning. That turned the city into a watercolor. It was not cinematic. It was work and breath and pain and a series of competent strangers using kindness like a tool. When the small, slippery fact of him arrived, the room made a noise that made everything else stupid. "He looks like he has opinions," Donovan said later, standing at the foot of the hospital bed. With an expression he tried to render neutral and failed. He had brought flowers that looked out of place under fluorescent lighting and a book of parks with dog-eared pages. "He will," she said, bone-weary, and grinning, "We'll have them. You'll teach him to draw them," he said. In the weeks that followed she moved slowly. Then less slowly. She checked site photos. With a baby on her chest, she dozed in a chair that had held a great aunt through 3 wars. Furthermore, she cried once because the bread went stale and then laughed at herself and ate it anyway with butter and sugar, the way her grandmother had taught her when she was small. Visitors came and left and promised to stop by the greenway when the trees leafed out. Elias did not come. She didn't ask him to. The trust account appeared as a line on a statement. Mechanical, unemotional. The kind of infrastructure that keeps families from bleeding out in court. It was enough. It was what they had agreed on. She did not revise it. A postcard arrived from the design lead on a research strip. A small sketch of a bench with armrests shaped like leaves. For the aunties he'd written. She stuck it on the fridge with a magnet shaped like a lemon. She returned to the site wearing boots that had seen better years. The community garden beds were rectangles of neat promise. The teen from the meeting stood with a clipboard, hair pulled back, focus weaponized. "We need mulch." She said, "How much?" 4 yards. Done by, said. Donovan appeared with a city official and a journalist in tow. And a spare umbrella. He stood back as the journalist asked questions that were not about the night, because the journalist had done some work. When the official tried to pivot the conversation to a press conference, Donovan coughed softly and the official pivoted. Back on a break, he handed her a thermos cap filled with broth drink. He said, non-negotiable. She did, like something settling across town in an office that smelled like toner and lemon. Cleaner. A man sent an email and asked for a day off. Did not say why. He took a train that rattled over water and walked 3 blocks to stand on a sidewalk where a fence had been freshly painted. Furthermore, he watched people he didn't know lift wheelbarrows and stake corners. Furthermore, he did not go in. He did not need to. Furthermore, he just stood until a woman with a clipboard said gently, "We're hiring," and handed him a flyer he would fold and unwrap half a dozen times on the way home. That night, Brian lay in bed with a baby breathing like a metronome at her collarbone and thought about how quiet triumph can be. No chandeliers, no auctioneer, just rectangles of dirt that would soon be green. She smiled into the dark. Not the triumphant smile of entrance, but the private smile of places built to last. The city was bigger than a night. The night had been necessary. The city was the point. Thank you for journeying with Brian through betrayal, resolve, and rebirth. If her emerald walk into the ballroom, the hand clasp with Donovan, or the quiet triumph of building something that lasts spoke to you, take a second to keep this story moving. Hit the like button so more people find it. Share it with a friend who needs a reminder that the worst night can become the first brick. Drop a comment about the moment that hit hardest. Was it the velvet box, the auction, or the final nod of goodbye? And subscribe for more cinematic, true-to-life tales of courage, consequence, and unexpected allies. Turn on notifications so you never miss a premiere. Your support helps us greenlight the next chapter of stories that honor strength without sacrificing heart. If you want a part 2 exploring the Bronx Greenway's opening, tell us below today.